Hi guys, we are now live from St. Louis. I am Grandmaster Romain Édouard from France, and well, this is my first stay in St. Louis as a resident GM. I've come here before as a commentator, as a player as well, and now it's a pleasure to be here as a resident GM and trainer. So today's masterclass will be about attacking masterpieces and very strong exchange sacrifices. We will start with a game by Kasparov, which is actually the easiest of the three. He just won one of these typical Najdorf, say using an exchange sacrifice that nowadays is well known to be great for black. Anyway, let's pass on. Let's go through the opening quickly. I mean, here white played queen f2 in order to increase the pressure on the d file, so that the d file is no longer covered by the white queen. So there is a vis-a-vis between the rook and the queen. e5 could come at some point. Also, this knight on b6 could be hanging, but Kasparov solved this problem playing the very natural knight fd7, which is anyway a move black plays in that kind of position because white will push g5 at some point. So all in all, queen f2 not only was let's say that first of all it was pretty useless, but after king b1 rook c8 it also turns out that the queen on f2 is highly misplaced because potential sacrifices on c3 are coming. Many years ago engines were not that strong, and it took them quite a while to understand that this that kind of sacrifice is pretty strong for black, because it understands not only short-term compensation but also long-term compensation. So that is why a strong player like Movsesian lost an easy game to Kasparov. Movsesian, I mean, of course Movsesian is not Kasparov, but as white against Kasparov the game is supposed to be a fight. Nowadays, of course, any good engine just shows that this kind of sacrifice is great for black. I see in the chat that someone says this looks similar to a Kasparov game, but this is a Kasparov game. This is Movsesian against Kasparov, played in the year 2000. So white played bishop d3 here, and now, of course, Kasparov took on c3. But he did not repeat a mistake his colleagues had done in the past, because that position had already been played, but black had tried to achieve immediate compensation. Black tried to recover the material immediately, playing moves like knight a4, trying to play against the c3 pawn and doing everything just to reduce the material balance. But Kasparov had the right approach, playing calm moves. Queen c7. Now knight a4 could definitely be a threat, because c3 would be impossible to defend. White played knight e2, and Kasparov just played bishop e7, and this is the right approach to this position. There is no concrete way to checkmate the white king. Black is going to obtain compensation playing d5 and just playing against the weakened white king and the weakened pawn structure on the queen side. But this is something, I mean, is not going to checkmate only with 3 pieces attacking the white king. He needs all of his pieces into the game. I don't know why this rook is colored. I don't know why there is a circle there, but whatever. Don't know if I can get rid of it. Looks like yes, I can. So anyway, Kasparov had the right approach. He just completed his development because he understood that he needs all of his pieces in the attack. White played g5. There is not much white can do apart from starting his attack on the king side. It is pretty clear that Kasparov is going to castle king side. I mean, he can't castle queen side anyway, but his king is not gonna stay in the center. It's pretty clear Kasparov wants his rook to join the attack, so Movsesian starts to push his pawns on the king side. Castles, h4, knight a4. Movsesian played bishop c1, which is a pretty natural move, I would say, although perhaps not the best. Of course, he is hoping for Kasparov to take everything on c3, after what he will just take and put his bishop on b2, and suddenly his king will be very safe and his bishop on b2 will be very strong, targeting the black king on the long diagonal. So, of course, again, Kasparov did not hurry. He continued increasing the pressure, played knight e5. White continued pushing his pawns, his kingside pawns. d5. So Kasparov started. Now that all the pieces are optimized, Kasparov opens the position. Queen h2 was played in the game. That's probably not such a great move, but the position is anyway extremely difficult to play. Black just played bishop d6, and now the white queen is having to move again. And here Kasparov could have played, let's say, a move like rook b8, trying to push b4, and he would have enormous compensation. But he decided to go for a concrete approach. He took on d3, which is a very surprising move at first, as the d3 bishop was not really powerful, and after cd3, the white pawn structure is, at least seems, much more solid than it was one move before. But he had a concrete idea in mind. Here he played b4, more or less forcing white to take on d4, because you can't allow b takes c3, and c4 would not be great either. You just take, and then, for example, say d takes c4, queen takes c4, the bishop on d6 is hanging, but the knight on e2 as well, and then the knight would come to c3, bishop e5 is a threat, also some sacrifices on e4, also b3. This would just be hopeless for white. So white took on b4, and now Kasparov had a very concrete continuation in mind. He played rook c8, threatening queen c2, basically forcing king a1. And now comes the concrete tactics, which is often the way. After you go for the dynamic sacrifice like rook takes c3, you improve all of your pieces, you open the position, and the game ends with a concrete tactics. This is the way it goes. Very often players make the mistake to sacrifice and then immediately try to look for the concrete tactics, because they don't want to stay so many moves and exchange down. But in this game, Kasparov had the right approach from the start till the end. And now, only comes the concrete tactics. D takes c4, pawn takes e4, and bishop takes e4. A very strong sacrifice which white cannot accept, since after bishop e5 check, white gets checkmated. He needs to put something on d4, otherwise queen c2 mate will come if the white king has to go to b1. But after bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, there is queen takes c1, and it's a mate. So that means after bishop takes e4, white cannot take. So out of desperation, Movsesian played g6. Kasparov simply took the material on h1, queen h1, bishop takes b4. It's very clear here that the white king is gonna be checkmated very soon. Pawn takes f7, king f8. I'm not saying that taking the pawn on f7 would be bad, but there is no reason to expose the black king when you can just play king f8 and allow zero counterplay. Queen g2 was played, rook b8, threatening simply bishop c3 check, and then queen takes c3, and the white king is just trapped on a1 because of the b8 rook. White played bishop b2 here, knight takes b2, and knight d4, trying to mess things up a little bit with this knight takes c6 threat. King takes b2 would just run into a mate, for example bishop d2 check, king a1, bishop c3, and so on, knight c3, queen c3, and then checkmate. Knight d4, here many moves were winning, but Kasparov just went for the concrete variation, knight takes d1, knight e6, king f7. White can take the queen immediately, or he can play queen takes on d7, king takes e6, queen takes e7, but in either case bishop c3 check will come and white will be left with a lot of material down, actually with almost no actually white will remain without any material on the board. So after king takes f7, white resigned. So that was a very easy victory for Kasparov, a victory that you would not see nowadays in a high-level game, for the simple reason that all these things are now well known. I mean, there is no strong players. There is no strong player like Movsesian who would allow rook takes c3 in such perfect conditions, because even a regular engine is showing that rook takes c3 is immediately better for black. But okay, that was, let's say, some sort of introduction to the exchange sacrifice. How do I move to the next game?
I would just exit out of that window.
Okay,
I don't know how to go to the next one.
let's do that. No, that's the same one. Oops, I just closed the notation. So the second one is a game of mine, which, well, I would not dare to compare to Kasparov's game, of course, but I thought it was nice to show it right after the first game, because basically what happened on the queen side in Kasparov's game happened on the king side in my own game. So obviously I will never say that my calculation was as deep as Kasparov's, but there are some similarities in a way that I mean, you will see when we will develop the game. So okay, this system, delaying knight f6, I like to play against players with a slight, with a slightly inferior rating to mine. It allows e4, that is a minus point, but okay, d5, I react in the center. Here cd5 and e5 is 1-9. This is more of an equalizer. I mean, here black can play, for example, d takes e4 and knight f6, and then trade many pieces. This is known to be nothing for white, but on the other hand, it is nearly impossible to win that kind of position with black. So I decided to keep the tension and play knight e7. And again, it's possible to trade everything, to take on e4 and knight c6, knight f5, to target the d4 pawn. White will have to push d5 at some point. Many pieces will get exchanged, and the game is extremely likely to end into a draw. So I decided to keep the pressure with knight bc6. My opponent played bishop e2 and I castled. My opponent castled as well. So now again I have this question: should I continue keeping the tension in the center, or should I play d4 and knight f5, which is some sort of equalizer? So I decided to play b6, which is a little bit sharper, and see what my opponent wants to play. Now it seemed to make sense for white to take and play e5. I played knight f5, attacking the d4 pawn, knight b1. So that may look like a weird move, but white simply wants to relocate the knight to c3, which is perfectly logical. I played f6. So I don't know why this is colored. So I react in the center. I mean, now that my opponent has pushed his pieces towards the queen side, to react in the center is something extremely logical. Bishop b5, that's also very logical. When I take on e5, white won't, I mean, first I have to protect my knight, obviously, but the bishop on b5 is very useful, because when I take on e5, white wants to be able to take on c6 and put a knight on d5. And this is what I did in the game, and at first it might look like suddenly white is doing very well, because he has a very strong knight on d5. The problem is that I'm going to play c5 next, and white will be unable to keep a solid center. And if I manage to break the center, if I manage to eliminate this d4 pawn and then push d4 myself, then my bishop on b7 will be a monster, the knight on e5 won't be well placed anymore, and the position will definitely turn to my favor. So here my opponent played queen d2. I played c5, obviously. Knight f3 back, because white definitely doesn't want to take on c5. After bc5, d4 would come, so white is ready to anything to keep d4 protected, so I can't open the diagonal of my bishop. Here I played knight d6, so I have several ideas. One is to sacrifice on f3, which is why I was sort of comparing this game to the previous one, because the previous one was an action sacrifice against white's long castle, and here we have an action sacrifice against white's short castle. Also, my knight on d6 is quite well placed. It might jump to c4 or to e4 on the next move. It's also difficult to find a good way to defend the knight on f3. For example, queen d3, I have bishop a6, winning an exchange. The same applies to queen e2. If queen e3, I have knight c4, winning time on the queen, and there are also some problems with the b2 pawn. So it is difficult for white to do something. In the game, I thought this was the best thing to do, but okay, I would take and play knight f5 and then d4, and again, I will get the best I can dream of from this position. My bishop will, after d4, my bishop on b7 will be extremely strong, putting pressure on the g2 pawn. The knight might jump to h4, the queen might come to d5. This will be a very unpleasant thing to deal with as white. So my opponent played rook a1 here, and of course this is our subject today. I took on f3 and played queen f6, so a calm move. I need my queen in the attack. Let's remove this arrow. I need my queen in the attack, and I'm asking a question to my opponent. Do you want to take on c5, but then d4 might come at any moment, opening the diagonal of my bishop, which might now turn quite disastrous for white if my queen comes to f3. So let me have a read at the chat. Okay, no big questions so far. So queen f6 and my opponent took on c5. So for example, that would be bad because after knight f5 the knight would come to h4 with check, and that would be quite disastrous for white. I've been thinking of knight e2 with the idea of playing queen f4 next. For example, queen takes f3, queen f4. The knight on e2 is hanging, but the knight on d6 as well, and white can dream of holding the position, but I think knight f5 is just strong. I want to play knight h4. If the queen comes to f4, then I have tactics like this one, attacking the knight on e2 with check, so white can't just play queen takes queen as I would take on e2 intermediary. If something like that, then I have knight takes d4 probably, but also knight h4, which could easily be stronger because queen takes f3 is another threat here, and that would go bad for white as well. So my opponent took on c5, and now we have a very concrete position. I have to make a decision here. I can take on c5, but then after knight takes d5, I need something concrete. I can take on f3, but then after queen e3, I might just help my opponent defending his position, as a queen is going to come as a defender to g3. And well, I have a concrete problem as well. It is pretty clear that I have compensation, but I have a clear problem to deal with, and this can only be solved with extremely concrete calculation. So I've been thinking for a while, and after some time I realized that this was a winning continuation. Queen g6 check followed by d4. Other moves, for example, this, for example, would not work for black. Queen h5, for example, attacking the pawn on f3, so knight e7, for example, just king somewhere, and the pawn on f3 is a big problem. But after, okay, king g2, maybe knight f5 is dangerous because of knight h4 coming. But after king g1, I could not see what I could do. Of course, I can make a draw with queen g6, but I did not see anything better. If I take, then the queen comes to f4, and after bishop takes d5, at the end of the day, I'm losing my knight, and white remains with an extra exchange, and of course a winning endgame. So that was not what I wanted. Let's say I saw that I considered this as a draw. I was calculating d4, of course, because after queen takes queen f3, at first it might look like white is in big trouble, but white just plays knight d5, and there again I could not find anything. Also queen f4 should be possible here, but even queen takes c5, and well, I would not have anything better than a draw. I don't know why I did not mention the move queen f4 here, which is similar to the previous position, if not exactly the same. That should be even stronger than queen takes c5, but anyhow, it was clear that after d4 and queen takes f3, there was no way the position could be winning for black. And after some calculation, I realized that this was very strong. Now queen takes d4 is not an option because of bishop f3 mate. Of course, I could not do that before. If I could first play d4 and then queen g6 check, that would be a dream, but there is queen g4. That is the problem. So that's the reason why I played queen g6 first and then d4. Now knight e4 is absolutely forced, since this is just mate in one. And after knight e4, I considered two moves, which I considered both as winning. Actually, both leading to very similar winning endgames. One was simply, well, first I consider 3 moves because this is also very good. I mean, I am keeping my d4 pawn. The knight on e4 cannot move because of bishop takes f3. I definitely have enormous compensation here, probably winning compensation even. So that was one of the possibilities. Like let's say that was a backup possibility if I couldn't find a concrete win. But I saw there were 2 concrete wins. One of them being knight takes e4. So there are some weird arrows there, but okay, let's just ignore them. Queen takes e4 check, f3, queen f5. If I can play if I can play b takes e5, then I'm doing very well. And there, in that position, I thought white is just going to sack the exchange back, and I couldn't see anything for black. So actually I thought there was a second win here which I had considered. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4 is f3. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe the 2 moves I was hesitating with were bc5 and queen f5 simply. So queen f5, threatening queen takes f3, and it's very difficult for white to defend this pawn in a clever way. For example, this is just knight takes e4, and it's very important that I can check and then take on e4, and now it's a checkmate. If queen e2, then I would just take, and that would be a huge improvement compared to b takes e5 right away. Knight takes d6 is still impossible because of bishop takes f3, but now bishop a6 is coming as well, rook e8, and the queen's being placed on f5, and e2 is definitely an improvement for black. Here black would be completely winning. So I considered queen d3, which is the move of the game, as critical. Again, bc5 is definitely a good option. It's like the backup once again. But I decided to go for a concrete variation. Pawn takes e4. So this is just winning for black. So white has to give a check. And actually, now I remember why I was why there were 2 concrete lines. I was thinking about, actually I was wrong about the moment of the game. Well, it was played in 2016, so that was 6 years ago, so you should forgive me for not remembering everything. So it's here that I was strongly hesitating when I was calculating all this in advance. Obviously, I thought that bishop d5, as I played in the game, was an easy option. White has to take on e4, queen takes e4, f3, and now I just recover the material, and this should be a completely winning endgame. I will come with my king to e5. I have a majority on the queen side, a majority on the king side. This is just hopeless for white, as you will see. However, I was also considering king f8 in that position, which is a funnier line. Takes, white needs to go f3, and after bishop d5, the queen has to go to d3 because this is just game over. If king g1, queen g4, then queen g2, that will be a checkmate. And rook takes f3 now is not just giving an exchange back, it is also losing the other rook on d1. So queen d3 is absolutely forced here, and I can again play a very similar Rokan game. The difference being that the e4 pawn is now on f3. So I was calculating for a while, but I simply thought that besides being simpler, I thought that this endgame was actually a better choice, simply because the pawn on e4 is an easier, first of all, is an easier target, since I can try to bring my king to e5, but also as there is no pawn on f3, I have a majority on the king side, so I simply judged this endgame as easier than the previous one. So this happened in the game, and here my opponent understood that he cannot just play random moves, he has to do something concrete if he wants to save the game. He's not in time for b4, I will just take and play rook b8, then the rook will have to be very defensive and I'll bring my king to e5, and this is completely over. So instead my opponent tried rook c1 and I simply played rook c8. I want to push my pawns c4, d3 and so on, or just bring my king. Rook c4, because my opponent's only chance to save this game is to play b4, but he can't do it now. I would just play c4, or first a b4 and then c4. So he's trying to block c4 and he wants to play b4. But now the concrete win arrives. d3, rook c1 back, and I went for rook b8. I mean, many things should win here, but rook b8 is sort of precise. If rook c5, I play d2, rook takes b2, and then rook b1 check and d1 queen. Of course, king g2 to avoid rook b1 check is even worse, because I will play d1 queen, and that will be an entire extra queen. So here my opponent has to play rook d1, c4. I'm threatening rook takes b2, putting an end to the game. So rook d2 has to be played, and again everything wins here, but I went for the concrete way with rook takes b2, takes c3, and here my opponent resigned because he can give a couple of checks, but they only help me bring my king closer, and then I will play c2, d2, and I'm going to queen one of my pawns, capture the rook with the queen that will be promoted. So this is game over. So now you understand the similarity of sacrificing an exchange against the opponent's king.
One question. What would you have done instead of rook c4? What if he had just played like king g2 and just tried to walk his king closer to assist the rook? What would your approach have been? Is he the same thing like d3, c4, and so on?
I don't think I would rush pushing my pawns. I think I would just bring my king first.
Okay.
If he wants to, I mean, if he wants to just play random moves, that will be in a way favorable to me, because I'm very happy to bring my king to e5, and my king will help me push my pawns easier. And I don't really see how white is going to do something. He can play rook c4 at some point. So actually here maybe you're right that that if I'm given a chance to play c4, I should do it. I mean, why not? I mean, here this is just this is just completely hopeless.
Right.
d3 or c3.
The king needs to be closer to help.
Yeah. So I think here king g2 would make more sense, but then maybe I would start with rook b8 just to see what white wants to do with his rook and to avoid any kind of b4, and then I would start bringing my king. And I do not see, I mean, white will never manage to push b4 ever, and if he doesn't, then the position is just lost. I mean, I bring my king to e5. If I want, first of all, I have some rook b3, or I can push c4. But even if I don't find a concrete win on the queen side, on the king side, I can play g5, g4, h5. Even if I sacrifice one pawn there and then take e4, then my d pawn will just go to promotion without further calculation. So, any more question? Okay, so, well, actually the last game is the most complex one, but as we have just some 20-25 minutes, we are going to we're going to go to the crucial moment of the game. That was a Slav defense with a6, which is one of Kamsky's specialties. I mean, I played against Kamsky, well, there were blitz games, but I played against Kamsky no more than a few months ago, and he was still playing this Slav with a6 that he has played all of his life, you know. So he definitely likes this opening, although I find it a bit passive for black, but he does like it very much. So this is how the game developed. So I may point out that bishop g5 is a very useful move. Why? Because in this position, when black plays e5 and everything gets exchanged on e5, the pawn on h6 will be hanging. That's the reason for including bishop g5 and h6. Here it's also important to mention that knight c3 is a very clever positional idea, and there is a very simple explanation to it. There is only one good square for the black knight, which is d5, and black has two knights for his only square. The other knight will remain bad and useless. So black's only chance is actually to bring the other knight to d5, as he did in the game, to f8 and then to e6, e7, d5. So it would be a huge improvement for black to exchange one pair of knights and put the knight on d5 right away. Here black has this problem, only one good square and two knights, so why to give him a chance to trade one of the knights? That's why Topalov played knight c3. Let's look at the game from the white side, by the way. Kamsky played rook e8, but he's still not threatening e5. Knight f8. Well, actually e5 now we could do, but then after takes, knight a4, bishop f4, knight b6 is coming, and black is having very concrete problems as well. So Kamsky went for this low maneuver, many arrows, but this time they make sense. So black wants to put the knight to d5, going through e6, e7, and then play bishop f5. And if he manages all this in good conditions, then his position will be fine. Queen b3 was played, knight e6, bishop e3, protecting d4, knight e7. So black is being very close to managing his goal. Knight e5, attacking f7, possibly attacking g6, knight d5. Now white traded one pair of knights, but black lost so much time to achieve this that it was time to allow it. And because white did not want to give the bishop pair away, he played bishop d2. Let's remove all of these arrows. They're probably here from some previous explanations I gave about the position. Anyway, here white wants to play rook e1. Black has a concrete problem with his b7 pawn. And if he goes, let's say, queen c7 to protect b7 and play bishop e6 or bishop f5, well, on f5 white will have g4. That won't bring very much. And here after rook e1, bishop e6 will never be possible because of knight takes g6. And there is no good discovery. I mean, in the worst case, there would be rook takes e6 on the next move if black had a good knight move here, but I don't think he has, because knight f4 is bishop takes f4. So black is sort of paralyzed here, and the only way Kamsky found that to give his position some sense was to take on e5 and play h5. He has to play h5 because his pawn is under attack. And if black can manage to play queen c7 and bishop b6, then his position is perhaps slightly worse. White has a bishop pair, but black is extremely solid. He lost his fianchetto bishop, but it's very important for him that white has a pawn on e5, so the long diagonal, I mean the a1 h8 diagonal can't be open, at least as long as there is a pawn on e5. So if he manages this queen c7, bishop b6, his position is playable. But here Topalov found a wonderful idea, which is to play rook e1. So bishop b6 is too early because of queen takes b7. Black had to protect b7 first, and now Topalov went for an exchange sacrifice. Black took, and rook takes c6. Now you can see all these weaknesses on the black side. Black would very much prefer that this h5 pawn stays on h7, but it moved to h6 a long time ago, so there is no way it could be there protecting the g6 pawn. Topalov played rook e1, putting pressure on one of the weaknesses. Obviously the two weaknesses are these two. Queen d7, queen d3, putting pressure on the other weakness. King h7, rook e5, attacking h5, knight f6. Here rook takes h5 would not be very clever. I mean, it would be a nice tactics because, of course, gh5 is not a legal move, and knight h5 just allows queen takes queen. But after king g7, white would be very much annoyed because he would have to trade queens. He would still have some compensation for the exchange, but this is not what he wants. So Topalov played queen e3, trying to, well, simply keeping queens alive. Threatening queen h6, so black was more or less forced to play king g7. He did not want to remove his knight from f6 because then the bishop would come to e4 and that would turn to a disaster for black. King g7 was played, and here I actually showed it too fast. The only piece in the white position that can be improved is the g2 bishop, and this is a very important strategical lesson in general, not only in the exchange sacrifice topic, but also in any kind of position. When you have improved, when you have optimized almost all of your pieces, you need to ask yourself, what piece can I still improve in my position? I mean, if you have a concrete win here, it could very well be that white has a concrete win, but it doesn't have. So if you can't find a concrete win, you have to ask yourself, what more can I improve in my position? Here, white should improve the position of his g2 bishop. That is not helping in the attack. The problem is that at first it looks like it cannot go to e4 because we do not want to trade this bishop. But bishop f1 to c4 and then trying to go to b3, c2 to target the g6 pawn would be extremely slow. But bishop f4 at once just works. The thing is that black can't capture it because of queen h6 check and rook takes e4, and the rook is coming to f4. Queen h7 is also a threat, and for example rook g8 loses to queen h7 check, followed by rook f4 check. So concretely speaking, there is no defense here for black. So by calculating this pretty simple line, queen h6 and rook takes e4, Topalov understood that he could get his bishop to the right diagonal right away. And now it's very clear that black is under huge danger with the g6 pawn being a clear target for white. King f7 was played. The sacrifices on g6 are not working yet. Bishop c2. So you see the bishop came to c2 in just 2 moves instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a huge win of time for white. Rook e8, queen h6, threatening bishop takes g6. That would lose right away because the white rook would come to g5 and you can say goodbye. And after rook g8, protecting the pawn, the d2 bishop has to move. So better move it somewhere where it attacks something. Now if black just plays some random move, the position is completely hopeless after rook g5. I mean, the pawn on g6 is lost. The bishop on a5 is useful because the black king cannot even run away. Bishop takes g6, we just recover the material with an enormous advantage. Perhaps this was objectively the least damage for black, but here material is equal. Look at the black king, look at the pawn structure. This is going wrong for black. So black decided for queen d4, a concrete line. The bishop went back to c3, and again, just returning with a queen is not an option because after rook g5 the game would be over. So Kamsky continued, let's say that he continued entering the concrete variations. This looks very dangerous because of bishop b3, but at least he's preventing the easy move rook g5, because now after knight e4 it is white who could be in problems. This is no longer a problem because e6 is not under attack, and this king f8. If queen h6 check, I'm not even sure black wants to make a draw. Maybe he even runs to e8. And black has got what he wanted, keeping the queen on c4. So black needed to play this move queen c4, so after rook g5 he could play knight e4, but now of course there is bishop b3. Queen d3, white already recovers one pawn and is already able to recover the exchange and have equal material and an excellent position. But Topalov wanted even more. He wanted to checkmate his opponent, so he played king g2, which is a useful move because, for example, bishop g8 would not be winning at once because of queen b1 check, rook d1 with some counterplay. Well, actually it would be quite good, but it would require some precise calculation. Queen b1, rook d1, and now black has some counterplay, but this would be a forced checkmate as far as I remember. Queen g7 check, and here bishop a5 is very important, so the king cannot escape to c8, and king e8 is queen f7 mate. So calculating all that, bishop g8 is also a very good move because I guess knight g8, queen h7 doesn't leave black many chances to escape. But anyway, Topalov took it easy and just decided for king g2. The difference is that if black plays queen b1 with the idea after bishop g8 to play the same rook d1, although we saw that it doesn't work because of rook e7, now white will play rook e1, and in case of if the black queen moves, now we take on g8, and if rook d1, queen f4 is a very strong move because queen b8 is basically impossible to prevent on the next move. So here Kamsky played rook f8, queen g7, so white is threatening things like bishop f5, after what it will be impossible to defend both the e7 pawn and the black queen. Black played rook d5. Of course it would be a dream for black if white would just take on d5, then black would have a very strong knight on d5 and everything would be defended. and suddenly even black would even have some activity with queen f3 check, followed by checkmate being threatened. So this is definitely not what white wants, but bishop f5 still works here. Rook f7, the only way to complicate matters, otherwise, I mean, rook takes c5, bishop takes queen, and game over. And here Topalov found the very precise rook takes e7. This should also be winning, but rook e7 is extremely precise. Here black resigned because after king e7, this is just a forced checkmate. And after rook e7, this is also completely over. On the next move, white is going to capture the black queen. So that was, I think, I mean, that was a true masterclass by Topalov. I mean, the whole game is a true masterclass. First, provoking h6 in order to slow down e5 from the black side, then keeping the knight so that black needs a lot of time before he can actually put a knight on d5, trading one pair of knights at the right moment, and then when black is just about to consolidate his position with bishop e6, e6 with an exchange sacrifice. Up to now, this is a masterclass, and the masterclass does continue. White attacks the weaknesses one by one, then penetrates with his queen, finds this key move bishop e4, winning a lot of time in the attack since knight takes e4 just loses. Bishop c2, queen h6, again based on precise calculation, bishop a5, bishop c3 back, and the rest was, let's say, pretty easy. If queen somewhere, we saw that rook g5 was winning, so black had to prevent it. After bishop b3, I would say that this was pretty easy, but Topalov, as I said, did not hurry. He played king g2 very calmly, and as I said, every game, I mean, every perfect game, I mean, Topalov was definitely playing for middle term, long term compensation when he sacked this pawn and exchange, but most of these games do finish with the brilliant tactics, and in that case, the brilliant tactics was rook takes e7, followed by a forced checkmate, as I showed before. So here we are. I see as a comment that Topalov is a brilliant chess player. I think most people know him for losing to Kasparov Well, Topalov indeed is an amazing, I mean, he is still an amazing player, but he is, let's say, semi-retired, not to say completely retired. But of course, he is one of these players who was always a pleasure to watch, because he is one of the few players, just like Magnus Carlsen, who never wanted to make a draw. He was sacrificing a lot, so there is in complete, I mean, is very different than Magnus Carlsen regarding the playing style, because Magnus likes to have a small advantage and just show his opponent that he is a better player. Topalov is a different style, is putting all of his energy into the game just to calculate better than his opponent and win the game at the end of the day. He also likes to take risk by sacrificing, by pushing his G pawn or his H pawn or whatever risky. I was lucky enough to work with him during 4 years. I even wrote a book about it, which I called My Magic Years with Topalov. So he's a good friend of mine, and working with him was just incredible. You know, in any position, he was trying to sacrifice something. We were trying. I mean, it was from 2010 till 2014. So we started more than 10 years ago, and by then the engines were not so as strong as now. It was really possible to find new ideas, and he was really trying to sacrifice things all the time, in every position, trying to take risk. And we might see more of. Well, it's quite likely that we will see more of his games during my stay in St. Louis, because he's definitely a fascinating player, and as we will speak a lot about attacking chess, definitely we're gonna see a few of Topalov games. So I think here we are for today. I hope you enjoyed the masterclass, although I feel like as I'm still a little bit, with the time difference, flying for France, I feel like I'm sometimes a little bit slow or a little bit confused. But I hope anyway I was clear in my explanations, and that you enjoyed the games and explanations. And I will see you. Well, I think we have another class. Is it perhaps not tomorrow?
Thursday.
So Thursday we have another masterclass. So we will see more excellent games. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments in the chat. Sorry that I could not answer all of the questions. And see you in 2 days.